Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Stephanie Singer, and I am a volunteer with ANJEE. Also with me here today is Pat Heaney, Kelly Wenzel, and Liz Johnson, who will be your co-host, along with our presenter, Claire Ung. And we are excited that you are here with us for the Authentic Learning Assessment for Asynchronous Remote Learning as part of ANJEE's 36th Winter Annual Conference. Thank you to the generosity of a few of our sponsors. This year's conference was free of charge. Special thank you to our friends at PSENG and New Jersey Natural Gas, and our anonymous donor who is a friend of science and environmental education in New Jersey. We are placing our link to our YouTube channel in the chat room. There you can find workshops on our autumn conference, and we'll be recording this workshop and it will be uploaded there. And we hope that you subscribe to our ANJEE YouTube channel. So a few reminders before we begin. We ask that everybody please keep themselves on mute throughout the presentation. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them into the chat room. And there will be time for live questions during the presentation, which our presenter Claire Ung will lead. So to get started, the description of this workshop is, for those of us who are struggling to engage students during the COVID-19 pandemic, when we're not meeting with them, this presentation will offer some helpful insight and advice. Our presenter will cover several ways to engage your students in authentic lessons using multiple media platforms, and will also help encourage critical thinking for asynchronous learners. So our presenter today is Claire Ung. Claire has 15 years of teaching experience at the Marine Academy of Science and Technology in Sandy Hook, New Jersey. She currently teaches marine biology, environmental science, and sustainable societies. She was named the 2021 Teacher of the Year. Congratulations to Claire. And without further ado, Claire, you may take it away.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Let me see if I can get my screen going. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I am so excited to be here for this conference, and I, like many of you, were thrown into a COVID-19 pandemic and trying to teach online. And it was really a struggle for me last year trying to adjust to the different ways that we were trying to do things online. And I was finding that I really wasn't engaging my students very well in the spring. And through trial and error and a lot of asking my students for feedback, I think I've come up with a few strategies that I think really helped me to become a better teacher for my students. And I think they're really enjoying the class now in the way that it is. And probably after this pandemic, I'm probably going to keep a lot of these strategies that I've been using in my classroom. On top of being an educator for the past 15 years in New Jersey, I'm also a mom of two young girls, and they are both learning from home. So I certainly understand it from both sides, both as a teacher as well as a mom, trying to navigate this very difficult time of trying to stay engaged and do some learning while we are in a remote asynchronous model for some schools. So I wanted to start by first thinking about what are some goals that we try to achieve when we're talking about remote learning. So if you could type them in the chat, if you're an educator, whether it's informal or formal, what are you hoping to accomplish when you don't get to see your audience or your learners and they are remote? What are you hoping to get from them? Thank you, Deborah. Retain information. To stay connected is really hard when we're remote. Participation, right? We want that engagement. Yeah, I really was looking for that engagement, and I think that fuels us, right? As educators, when we don't have that engagement, we don't see our students, we don't get that feedback, keeping them focused. And all of these things, I think, are things that we struggle not just with remote learning, but particularly when we're asynchronous and we don't have a set time that we're meeting with our students, and we're asked to still keep them engaged and keep them inspired, to get them outside to do things, right? We want them to kind of really connect with environmental science and really understand the material. So why aren't they engaging with us? Why do they not like asynchronous remote learning? What do you think the students are saying about it? The lack of structure. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing with their time. Distractions. My gosh, like they're home. They got Netflix on the TV. They got computer games. They got their PlayStation. Environmental science teachers may not be as exciting as their PlayStation. Yeah, lack of interaction with their teachers and friends was actually one of the top things that my students said on the survey as to why they disliked the spring semester, last spring. And they really said that the lack of interactions with their classmates was something they really missed. And they weren't seeing that when they were going remote. It's hard to collaborate, right? If students are not on at the same time, that they're not on with their teachers, connectivity issues, right? Like if we're not all having access, there's accessibility issues. Some students said that they felt a lot of our assignments was busy work, that we were giving them worksheets and asking them to complete it. You know, I would give them a list of things. These are the things you need to learn for air pollution. And it was just like a very dry worksheet, and they just did not like it. Students also mentioned that they found sometimes they were confused if they were doing well in my class. They didn't know if they were on track. They didn't know if they were succeeding and if they understood the material. And then the test came and they just were blindsided. They didn't really know where they were. On the flip side, what are some things that we as teachers struggle with when we're thinking about our students and we're trying to convey that information? I knew my list was really long. I was like, I have a list of 10 things that I cannot get done. Comprehension, yeah, it's a lot of the same things, right? Like that, I think it comes down to feedback and engagement. I think teaching and learning is such a dynamic process, and so much of that is removed when we are asynchronous from our students. We're unable to check for their understanding. We can't catch them on those teachable moments. It's really hard to know if they're absorbing it, and I was finding that, you know, I wasn't sure where my students were. And then what about like tests and quizzes when it comes to the end of your unit and your principal is asking you to assess your students? What do you worry about when you're giving them a test? Is it fair, right? Did I cover it? Do all the students get it? Is it their work, right? Did they do this? Or did they plagiarize it from the internet? Did they look it up somewhere, right? Is this something they Googled? Is it authentic? Right. So, when I was starting to think about what was I asking of my students and what was I teaching my students in my class, I realized that what my students were asking for was more authentic work. They wanted to do authentic learning and they wanted to get authentic lessons. And so then I started having conversations with my students about what that might look like. When I started, this is my confession. This is my actual worksheets. This is what it looked like for my class. If you were sitting in my class in environmental science, I I taught in person, and when we had to teach online, I turned my worksheets into PDFs and I put it up and I told my kids to fill it in. And it wasn't exciting. They didn't want to do this. They didn't want to go on a chapter on air pollution and go to a website and fill in questions about the goal of the IPCC. They didn't want to do a unit on water pollution and have to identify different things on a worksheet. It wasn't anything that they felt like they wanted to sit in front of a computer and do for the next hour. So I had very low engagement. And then when I went to meet with them, this is not an actual Zoom screen. When I went to meet my students, this is what I was staring at, right? Like they weren't there. I was like talking to this abyss. I wasn't even sure if my students were actually sitting at the computers talking to, listening to me. I was just lecturing to myself, and it was just, like a seance. Like I was, hoping that somebody was on the other side and hoping that somebody was going to be there. And again, I started to ask my students, I said, I know I'm struggling. I know they are struggling. So let's have that discussion about how we can change that. And what I realized is that the way that we teach in person cannot be the way that we teach online. They're completely different. It is like a seance. They're completely different mediums, and we can't treat them like they are the same thing. But the other part that I realized was that my Generation Z students were not the learners that I was as a millennial, and that the way that I learned and the way that I grew up and the way that my teachers taught me in school is not the way that my Generation Z students are connecting with that material. This is a generation that was born with a cell phone in their hands. They have been born knowing how to use a tablet when they were babies. And they are so used to multitasking, to juggling different screens, to processing information in a different way. They're not a generation where they want to be spoon-fed information. They want to go out and find their own information. And overwhelmingly, my students crowdsource their learning. They are a generation that does not go to news outlets or news websites. They get their information about the news and politics from other people. They go to TikTok, they go to Twitter, they go to Facebook, they get it from other people. So they're a generation that doesn't accept information directly from quote unquote an expert. They prefer much more feedback and interaction and engagement. And I realized that as a teacher, my goal needs to transform from trying to get my students to memorize the content and regurgitate it on a test to creating tasks that was interesting to them, that was relevant to them, and something that they wanted to participate in. I like to think about Edgar Dale's cone of experience, and this has been around since the 1960s. And confession time, you don't have to confess, but I'll confess. My assignments for a very long time as a teacher was right there at the top, the little pinnacle where we're not supposed to be, where we give them lots of readings and I ask them to watch a video or listen to my lecture. That's not retainment. That's not what we have scientifically proven makes us learn and retain information. And somebody in the chat wrote that, right? We want them to learn. We want them to retain information. And passive learning is a method where the instruction that the students are getting from their teacher is not really internalized. We're asking them to become rote learners or memorizers. And the learner actually receives very little feedback from the instructor as to what they are learning. And while it's tempting to stay in that region where we are teacher-centered, because I know I was tempted for a very long time, there's so many benefits to being teacher-centered. You have control over the format, right? I want to give them what I think they need to know, right? I'm in charge. I tell you what you need to memorize. These are the things you need for your AP test. I was limited by time, right? I have a set amount of time and I need you to learn this in this amount of time. My curriculum is packed. I have to get you to learn this in this amount of time. And it's really tempting to push them into that passive learning. But if we look at passive learning, we realize that this is very surface processing. This is not deeper learning. We're not getting the students to really understand the material and we're not really getting them to use it. There's the old-fashioned quote, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. But if you teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. What we're aiming to do as educators is we need to get them in the active learning category. We want them doing things. We want them presenting. We want them doing things that they're going to remember because they did it. They taught it. And so then it comes down to what does that look like, right? Active learning is any time that we're now asking the students to participate in interacting with the material, to take the material, to play with the material, to really engage with the material. And it's messy, right? If you look at that cartoon, it's messy. If you walk into a classroom where active learning is happening, the students are not sitting in their seats, they're not holding a pencil, they're not writing down what the teacher is saying. Instead, it's going to look like chaos. But isn't that our goal? Isn't our goal to teach them to learn? And 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 when we're thinking about these things, about experiential learning and engaging assignments, and I thought about this before a pandemic hit, I would always say to my principal and I would say to my friends, I can't do it. I have a bell. I have a bell that rings every 80 minutes and I have to move on. I have students, I want to be flexible. I want to differentiate. But I have students at different paces and they come to my class at 9 a.m. and they leave at 10:10. I can't personalize my lesson. I cannot be flexible. I have a hard time getting 25 students to be in the class at the same time while I'm lecturing. I can't do these things that make for an infused classroom. But here's what I discovered during the COVID-19 pandemic. I reframed my mind about what I'm facing, and I realized that the silver lining to this really dark cloud that we're in right now is that asynchronous learning combined with technology, means that my students learn at their own pace. And I differentiate my work now. The kids move. When they are ready, they move forward. If they're not ready, they don't. And we find time when they are ready to put in more time when they need to, because we're not meeting synchronously anymore. And if they realize that they're falling behind and they want to get caught up, they put in that time. They meet with me separately. We find time to engage that way. And not everybody is forced to be in the classroom at 9 o'clock in the morning and work from 9 to 10:10. Now, there are many different models that you can go about to try and tackle your unit lessons as you're trying to teach them. And I teach environmental science, but certainly this applies to many other classes also. But I really like the 5E model of instruction, because the 5E model of instruction, if you're looking at these steps of engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate, really talk about promoting active learning. What we're asking the students to do is do more than just listening and reading. We want them to ask questions. We want them to make observations. We want them to draw their own conclusions. I want them to argue with me about the evidence that they're reading. And on top of that, I'm asking my students to collaborate with their peers, to carry out investigations, to work together for a common goal so that we can get to the end unit assessment that we're hoping to achieve. On the next slides, I'm going to walk you through this 5E model that I use, and I find it's really effective for my classroom. And every project that I'm going to show you on the next few slides are a project that I actually did in this school year, in the 2020-2021 school year. So all the screenshots and videos that I'm going to show you right now are things that we've done since September in my classroom. And it comes from one class. This is my environmental science class. All right, so the first step is we need to engage our students. In the 5E model, what we're looking to do is we're going to give our students a phenomenon, a problem. This is basically your unit essential question, right? So if you pull your unit essential question out and you think about what do they need to know from this unit, that's what you want the students to start with. Start by asking them your unit essential question. Put that up on the board. Tell them to make a connection between what we've learned already and where we're going in the future. And then I kind of give them like just general tasks, right? This is what you need to know by the end. This is the unit essential questions that I want you to know. But I don't force any information on them, and I don't give them any answers as to what the answers to those unit essential questions are. So at this point, I'm just presenting a situation. I may give them a task. I may tell them kind of the outline of where we're going with this unit. But really the key is I'm trying to get them to engage with this concept or unit that I'm working on. So I need to ignite them, right? I need to captivate them. I need to make them excited about this chapter. And some chapters are dry, but almost every chapter in environmental topics is relevant to their lives, is relevant to the world. And it's what's so exciting about being an environmental educator. So I have the students thinking about things. And in this step, you want the students to be asking, why did this happen? What do I already know about this topic? What is this problem that Ms. Ung is presenting, and how am I going to solve this? So these are just some ideas of ways that I engage my students in this step. And it may be I'm using a hook. I might present them with a problem. I might connect it to something they're already working on. And here are some examples of what that might look like in my class. So this is day one. Day one, they have no information. They know nothing about the chapter. And I put on a 4-minute video. This video, I clipped it, so it's only a minute, but I'm just going to play it really quick for you to give you an example of what the class, when you come to class, what you might see. Let's see if it goes.
The open plains of the asphalt jungle. Home to many creatures great and small, and the popping ground for one of the most clever and illustrious creatures, the plastic bag. Today we explore the cycle of life for this curious creature, the plastic bag, on its migration to its home, the Pacific Ocean. Once released into the wild, the plastic bag is unsure of itself. It falters at first, but soon, with some help from the wind, the bag will be airborne. This flight will be the first in its long journey towards its final destination, the garbage patch in the heart of the Pacific Ocean. Using the wind to guide it, the plastic bag moves across the city through the air. A city park. This park may at first seem an idyllic place for the plastic bag, but danger lurks round every corner. Here it will encounter many enemies, including one of the most dangerous, park services. Poor little fellow.
And then I have my students respond. Now, again, remember, this is asynchronously. So I post a video to my students, I ask them to reflect, and then they reply using videos because I want to hear their voice.
So the biggest takeaway I got from this video was that it was mocking how plastic bags go through so many phases before reaching the ocean. Like it was drifting through the park in one scene and then it was fighting like a little dog in the next scene. And it's like the plastic bag goes through so many stages before getting into the ocean where it's not biodegradable, and then different sea life and sea animals suffer because of that. And so the most important thing I learned is that once you are done using a plastic bag, get rid of it as soon as possible, or just not use plastic bags in general and opt for reusable bags or brown paper bags that might be easier to break down.
So she's responding with having been given no information from me. So she logs onto class, she sees this, and then I just ask her to give me her feedback. Now, this platform that I use is Flipgrid, and I'll talk more about it. Flipgrid is one of my favorite platforms. I really find that I can hear my students' voice. I can get very authentic reflections from my students. It forces them to communicate with me. And now there's an option on Flipgrid where you can actually, if their students are shy, they don't have to put a video. It can just be their voice recording, but it requires a voice. So they have to speak to me. And I like it because every student has their own opinion, their own voice, and it just sparks them in getting to think about this unit and what we're working on. So let me advance the slide. Oh, it's going to try and play again. Okay. Some other tasks that I might be trying to do with the students at this stage is I'm trying to elicit responses, and I'm trying to get them to think about topics. So when we do the unit on environmental hazards and risks, I might put up a 20-question survey that asks them if they think this thing is risky or not. And the things may be things like, earthquakes, or on here, there's a high-fat, low-fruit vegetable diet. Is that risky? Is it not risky on a scale of 1 to 10? And as soon as they answer these questions, which again, done asynchronously, they see the responses of their peers, right? And they love this because they want to know, and they can't see the responses until they finish it. So they want to answer it and they want to finish it. And then they convince all their friends, have you voted yet? I need you to vote because I need to know the answers, right? They get all excited because they want to know what their friends are thinking. And then when they pull it up, they'll see something like, well, look at acid precipitation. They're confused about acid precipitation. They have no idea if that is risky or not. We have got some students that are saying that acid precipitation is a 1, and we have some students who are saying acid precipitation is a 9. So why is it happening? And again, I asked them to just do a quick journal response. Tell me what you think is happening. And lastly, the way that my students really love, this was their suggestion, what they really loved that I've been doing lately is competition and contest, because it means money for them. And so they're like, can you find more competitions like the one that you just had us do? Because that's exciting. Now they're realizing the assignments that I'm giving them in their classroom could mean money, and they're winning. They're having fun. They're competing against other people. They're doing tasks that they feel is meaningful. It's not just for my class. It's not busy work. These are things that they can communicate with, they can present, they can share with others. And we're going to come back to these 2 competitions later. I'll show you some of my student submissions for these 2 competitions. Jason Learning was about recycling, and the Global Population Challenge, which actually 7billion.com is a contest about the human population. So then we want to get our students to explore. Once the students have engaged and I kind of hook them in, then I need to give them time to explore. And this is the great thing about asynchronous learning. Some of them need more time to explore. Some students need less time to explore. And over time, my students get a really good sense of how much time they need for this. Some people get it right away. That's great. Then you can turn on Netflix and go do something else, right? We're not all forced to sit there for the hour and a half that class is supposed to be held. If you need more time, then you know that you're going to have to put in more time for environmental science, because this is not something that you get very innately. So you're going to have to put in more time to get to where you need to be, because I'm also going to pull in group work and collaboration. And you're going to feel pretty bad when you're sitting in your group and you don't know, how to contribute on that team. So that makes it really hard. So it makes them accountable, because they don't want to let their friends down. They'll let me down. They don't want to let their friends down, right? So what does explore ideas look like? I want them to start discussing with their classmates. And again, they're going into this what we call blind. I, as a teacher, have not told them anything about this chapter. And they're just sitting there being like, you know what she's talking about? And somebody's like, maybe she's saying this. And someone's like, maybe she's trying to get us to do this. But they're trying out things, right? I want them to have an organic exploration, and they're comparing ideas at this stage. So how do I get them comparing? I love cooperative learning in my classroom. Cooperative learning really focuses on having them engage with each other instead of having lecture-based learning. And because they take on the responsibility of getting that learning, it makes them read the textbook, it makes them look up answers online, and then they come to the table being like, actually, I did read this article that talked about biodiversity loss. It was on the news, oh, I saw this thing on TikTok about water use. It was a really catchy jingle, and they shared that information. And this is a great game called Solve in Time. Solve in Time was developed by Dee Lanier, and it makes it time-based. So they only get 8 minutes to answer my question, and then I'm moving on. And while this is an example of something that is synchronous, it is something that I use remotely. And so since my school does have set times once a week on Wednesdays where everybody is together, I use that Wednesday time to make them play these games where they're sort of, under the timer, under the clock, and they're rushing to try and finish an answer. This is probably really familiar with you. So most teachers have been going to using online labs or online simulations, and there's lots of many great websites that offer simulations. These are just 2 examples. PhET simulation is free. The other one, Explore Learning Gizmos, is a paid subscription that I have through my district. But my goal at this stage is I actually did away with worksheets. So I know we're really tempted in the beginning where we want to give them a worksheet. And I showed you an example on my 3rd slide, I think, when I started this. I gave them a worksheet that literally had questions like, what does the red dot mean? It was such baby questions. They were tired of those baby questions. They didn't want to have to tell me what the red dot is. They could see the red dot was carbon dioxide on this greenhouse effect lab. And here I was treating them, these 17-year-old seniors, and I'm asking them, what does the red dot mean? They didn't want to answer that question. They didn't want to play that game. So now I actually give them the greenhouse effect lab, and instead of asking them directed questions like, how does CO2 change from the ice age to present? I don't ask them any of that. Here's what I ask when I assign a greenhouse lab. I say, how do greenhouse gases affect the climate? That's it. And it's up to them to, piece that apart. What does she mean? What are greenhouse gases? Which greenhouse gases are shown in this lab? What is climate? Where's the climate? How are we measuring that? What is she looking for as criteria? It's open-ended. And I just want to probe them and make them make sense of the experience and get them just thinking and puzzling through some of these problems. Now, I know we started by saying that we don't want them to just read, right? Reading is not retention, but there is a place and time for reading. So I still do give them reading assignments, but I try and target my reading assignments to not be something where I'm posting a reading assignment and then I'm having a worksheet that accompanies it, right? I'm not trying to have them answer these 10 things about this reading to check if you understand how to look for an answer in the document. They're 12th graders. They get that. They know that, if they're looking through this, you know what they do? I'll tell you. They'll copy and paste like keywords and just use the find button to find your thing, and then they copy and paste it back into your worksheet. And maybe if they're really smart, some of them will say, I'll do the odds and I'll have Pat do the evens and we'll just trade answers. right? That's all you're getting from a worksheet. So what I do instead is I say, again, on Flipgrid, read this article, and this article was specifically about women's lives in less developed countries, focusing on disparities between male and female treatment across health, nutrition, education, housework, employment, and political status. And again, I have not taught them anything about this chapter. I just said, go read this article. And then I have my students respond.
I think the biggest issue facing women is really like a lack of education. Because without education, the woman, like, there's really no opportunities for her besides to get married, and that getting married at such a young age, like many women do, because they lack education, leads to a whole host of other issues. I think like the traditional role for women of being subservient to men is still a thing in many parts of the world because women don't really have any opportunities. So there's no way like they can do better. Like all they have like in a lot of the world is like either just their kids and then their marriage and their family. They can never really like have a career or like do like labor that's not considered typically for women. They're not afforded equal respect because I think it's probably always been like that in those cultures. Women were always seen as less than men because maybe they're not like as physically as strong, or people didn't think they were as smart. So, and those like that perpetuates today. Yeah, I think especially like when my grandma's age, like women still rarely had careers and stuff, and now I think that's changed a lot. Like I think women can have careers and have families and have everything, as opposed to 50 or 60 years ago, where it was really unheard of for a woman to have like a full-time career on top of being a mother as well. Yeah, and I think just like continuing this trend of allowing women to like enter the workforce and everything is good as we continue. A society like really progresses when the gender roles are more equal, because when they're not equal, you really set out like half of your population like can't do anything. They can't innovate. They can't like really participate in the workforce. So they're really not contributing that much aside from being mothers. But when the sexes are equal, you have that other half coming in, and I think it can really make a country a lot more successful.
So now again, he's responding to how he feels. And I never grade my students on right or wrong answers. There's no right or wrong answer. I tell them every answer is valid, every person's opinion is valid. And when they're doing this on Flipgrid, I also require them to respond to 2 classmates. So they have to add value to the discussion, and they have to respond to a classmate. I'll tell you, some of the girls had a lot to say to this boy when they heard this, okay? They were like, what do you mean? You think it's changed that much? Like, you know, or they would be like, you think it was that different? You think it's that easy to be a woman in the world today? And so they have a lot of that discussion back and forth among their peers. So they hear each other's voices, they're listening to what each other has to say, and then they're kind of feeding back and forth, right? Because they're required to respond to 2 friends. And they kind of, you know, thinking about what each other are saying, where they might be going with the direction, so that later on when we do assignments about this topic, about human rights and females and voting, it comes back up. And I'll say, Dylan, do you remember when we talked about this and I saw your video and we did this? So it comes back up around. And I also add on the Flipgrid. So I'll make videos and I'll respond and say, that was really insightful. Why do you think that way? Why do you feel this way? Did something happen? You know, like how, you know, add to that conversation. Oh, trying to advance the slide. Now, then we're going to move into the explain. And explain is really going to be 2 parts. The first part is I want to ask the students to share their models and explanations for their experiences so far in the engage and explore phase. So that was an example of what that starts, right? I have them engaging, I have them exploring, and then I want to hear them. But the second part is I need to guardrail them, right? So we don't want the car to go off the cliff, because sometimes they're like, you know what, women shouldn't have rights. Yeah, you know, screw them. And they just go off the cliff, right? So I'm going to be like, no, let's think about this. Why would that be a bad idea? So the second part is a teacher then at this stage needs to provide resources and information to support that student learning and redirect them with the scientific and technological concepts that you want them to get in this unit, right? And then you want them to reflect. So you're going to say, these are the things I, you know, kind of want you to explore. That was good. Let's look at this. And then have them revise what they have learned so far. So they're refining, right? They're filtering. They're clarifying their knowledge. And I really want them to explain their concepts in their own words. And I want to check for understanding at this stage. So a lot of times this is where I'm going to put a quick quiz in there or a test. And so the model is a little bit different, right? In a traditional model, I'm going to stand in front of the board. I'm going to give the information. You're going to write it down. You're going to do a homework. And I'm going to test you. And then I'm going to move on. I'm actually going to put the test right in the middle. I'm going to test them now in step 3 out of 5 steps. And I'm going to ask them to perform on that test for me. Some of this might be group work, right? So they're going to be explaining what they have learned in groups. They might be working on a team about the carbon cycle. And this is an example where I gave them a slide. I said, the 4 of you are going to have to explain the carbon cycle to me. Each person is responsible for one corner. I'm not giving you any directions. I'm not giving you any questions. I have nothing that leads them to what it means when I say human activities. Open-ended. You tell me what you want to put in that corner. There's no directions. And then I have them quality check a classmate. So I say, you have to look at 2 other boxes aside from the box that you were assigned. And you're going to have to check Jamie and Chris and what they found. And whether you tell me if you think Jamie and Chris covered what they should have covered for those boxes. So now, technically, they had to know 3 of those 4 boxes, because they're doing more work. They do their own box and then they have to check somebody else's box. Or I have them working in teams where I ask them to look up an environmental pioneer. I gave them no further directions than the name of the pioneer. So I just said, you're in charge of Gaylord Nelson. That's it. I'm not telling you if you need to look up his birth date. I'm not telling you if he founded something. I'm not telling you why he was important. All I gave you was a name. And now you're in charge of learning about Gaylord Nelson, and you're going to tell everybody about Gaylord Nelson in a week. But before I did that, I partnered them with someone randomly. So I actually did a random draw. They were really excited. We raffled it up. And then I just randomly partnered up 2 pioneers. Find commonality. Find some similarities. And they were like, wait, this dude and her, we don't even know. They're not even on the same continent. They didn't even live in the same time. Find commonality. This peer feedback and discussions and learning really gets them to think beyond what is just given to them on Wikipedia. Because now they need to think about, how does my pioneer link to her pioneer? Where are we going with this information? And then he created a PowerPoint for me. I'm going to skip over this one. This is a hexagonal concept map. I love a hexagonal concept map because no 2 concept maps are going to look the same. What I do is I put up the blank template at the top corner. It is blank hexagons. I have some arrows for them. They know that they have to put at least 5 connections. And then I list the vocab terms that I want them to know. So again, this is where the teacher led, right? I want to make sure I'm leading them and making sure that they understand at least these concepts when we're talking about, I think that was a chapter on climate change, right? So I'm like, these are the things that I want you to walk away with. If you didn't cover all of this yet in your explorations, you're going to need to do this. So they work in teams and they're going to drag those terms around, and they work in teams and figure out, how are these ideas connected? No 2 hexagon maps are ever going to come out the same. This is authentic work. They're making an original piece. And every time that they put this together, I then also make them Flipgrid it, and I'll say, all right, Sarah, you're going to have to explain the connection on connection 1. And Pat's going to do connection 2, and Stephanie's going to do connection 3. So everybody does a different portion, and you're going to explain that to me on Flipgrid, and I'll respond to you about what I think about your connections. Of course, you also have just straight out teacher instruction, right? So if we want to, give them more training wheels, you can give them teacher instruction. And that can be many different platforms. I like Pear Deck and Edpuzzle. Those are my 2 go-tos. These are just screenshots of lessons that I have given them, and I'm looking for feedback. I'm looking for engagement. I'm looking for the answers. I'm looking to make sure that they understand the material. But I'll tell you, do not be tempted to do this in the first step. Why? Type it in the chat. Let me hear it. Why do you think we don't want to just give them teacher-fed instruction right away? That was a good book. I love that one. Yeah, right? You take away something from this journey. And you know what ends up happening when we do teacher-led instruction first? The kids are just like, just give it to me, right? I know it's going to be on a test. You just feed it to me. I'll memorize it and I'll give it back to you. Yeah, It's not independent, right? It's not engaging. They're bored, right? If you give this to them first and then you're like, okay, now go explore the playground, they're like, no, I don't really need to. All I need is a slide. I don't need to get on the seesaw. I know you didn't need me to get on the seesaw, so I'm not going to get on the seesaw because all you cared about was a slide. So I want them to really do it first. Yeah, get them exploring, get them experiencing it first. And when they have the discovery and engagement first, and then they come back to this, they get the aha moment. They're like, oh, you're right. That's where that connection comes in. Oh, I was wrong, right? This is where you're going to debunk the myths, clear up any misconceptions. So if there's any misconceptions or things that you need to clarify, this is where that's going to come in. And they start to realize this on their own. I don't even need to tell them they're wrong. They just pick that up on their own. So once we've kind of touched base, I normally will quiz them again one more time. I'll just make sure everybody's on the same page. Then I kind of want to bring them to the next level. I want to extend their learning and concepts. So some students are still going to have misconceptions at this stage. Some students are still struggling. So I'll say that this stage is kind of the one that I struggle with the most, because I'm apt to be like, all right, let's go. You know, I'm ready to move on to the next one. But I have students that will be still grasping those concepts, and I know I need to slow down for this stage. And this is the one that I always find the hardest to manage personally. But what I want to do is I want to then give them activities that provide them time to apply what they have learned, what they have found, what I have said, what their classmates have said, and take it to the next level. So what might that look like? We're basically amplifying, right? We're trying to broaden their horizon. We're trying to enhance their learning. So they're going to be taking previous information that they've had, and we're going to be asking them questions. And then I want answers. And I'll say, when I first started teaching environmental science, my class was a doom and gloom class. I was like, these are all the reasons that the humans have been destroying the planet. All right, class, go to lunch. Right? That was it every day. I get up and be like, all right, today we're going to talk about water pollution. Tomorrow we're talking about the fires burning. Tomorrow we're talking about species dying. It was terrible. They left class being like, I don't want to come back to your class. This is the worst class. So now I focus on solutions, right? Now that we know those are issues, what do we do with that? What do we do with this information? What can you do to fix the world? Because you are the next generation. You will be the inspirers. You will be the next pioneers. You are the activists. You will make that change for this planet. So very early on, I showed you this picture at the lower bottom corner. It's a contest called 7 Billion Contest. The contest challenges students in high school to create a short video up to 60 seconds. Very, very short. This is not a big investment. 60 seconds about a human population growth issue. And this year, they were supposed to highlight one of 3 challenges on a global level. They could either talk about promoting environmental justice, they could talk about strengthening global health, or they could talk about reimagining industrial systems. And every year they pick 3 different topics, which is great, because they can, my students can't just take their brother's work and submit it, right? So they're like, you know, Jimmy did a different topic. I'm like, yeah, Jimmy had a different year. He did a different topic. And so all of the videos are looking to talk about how population growth impacts one issue and what can they do to kind of fix it. And my students kind of explore this, and there's a lot going on in this slide. This is just screenshots of my classroom assignment, some of the writings that they're doing. And then, you know, I have them again telling me what's going on.
So for the video contest problem statement, my group is working on promoting environmental justice, and the specific topic that we're focusing on is the placement of hazardous waste sites. And once we found out that people's lives are at risk and their health is being affected by the placement of hazardous waste, that's when we realized it's a problem that we should probably be focusing on and making or spreading awareness.
So that was her early stages, right? She's realizing this is going to be a topic. She's going to try and tackle this. Oh, sorry.
So for the video,
she's going to try and tackle that. I started this unit on food production this year by showing them a short clip of the movie The Martian. Because who doesn't like Matt Damon, right? We all want to look at Matt Damon. And I put The Martian on and it said, you know what? Do you think this is feasible or not? That was the opening question. I was like, do you think the things in The Martian is something that, you know, is the direction we're going? Is this something that we are supposed to do? And wait for them to respond. And then I said, you know what? This year, You're going to do it. I want you to figure out how we're going to feed astronauts in space. So I participate in this challenge. It's a Space Chili Grow a Pepper Challenge. It's in collaboration with a NASA scientist, Jacob Torres. He's a horticultural scientist at NASA Kennedy Space Center. And they were so excited. We got these seeds from Jacob. He mailed them to us. I handed out these seeds. They treated it so gingerly. They took them home carefully. And this is a project that they did at home. Everybody's growing it in their own houses. I asked them to document it, and I left it open-ended. Grow a pepper plant. And they're like, but Miss Ong, am I supposed to put it in soil? Am I supposed to keep it by the light? Am I supposed to water it? How often do I water it? I was like, what do you think? How often should you water a plant? Maybe you need to do research. How much do peppers need? Where do peppers live? What climates do peppers are from? Like, where do we get this? Oh, it's from Arizona. What's Arizona like? How should we grow this? What do you think makes a pepper spicy? Can we figure that out? And then they just started, right? They started getting excited. They were working on this. It's a great project. They're really open to students just experimenting and learning. It's all about citizen science and getting them to kind of just explore. And then we get to evaluate, right? So that's the big scary one for a lot of students when we get to the end, because it's really important that at the end, my students receive feedback from me about how they're doing. And informally throughout this process, it can be informal checks. It could be the quizzes that I give. But formally at the end, I also want them to know where they stand in terms of their individual student progress as we're working towards this goal. And yes, tests and quizzes come in here, right? We ultimately are responsible for getting our students to those SGOs. We have AP tests that come at the end, but I also want to look at my students more holistically. I want to make sure that my students are getting feedback from other students. I want to make sure I'm using rubrics that the students are aware of how they're getting tested. I want to make sure that the students are going to deeper concepts beyond just what's going to be on a test. I want to make sure that they're engaging with this, that they're excited about this, that they're taking this to the next level. And most of the time, I want them to be able to communicate this to somebody else. And I think I might just play one of these because of time constraints. But one thing that I love to do is just ask them how their week was.
I'm really happy that we got to return to school this week. I think everyone, teachers and students, are trying to just figure out how this is going to work with some students at home and some students in class. But it's a lot easier to keep track of everything now that we get to see the teachers in person some days, and it's fun getting to see all of the other students again.
And now I'll play this really quick.
Hi, Miss Ong. This past week was really long and rough with college applications and just work in general. It was my last full week of band, so that's kind of strange. For next week, I'm gonna try and get done everything. Try and get all my college essays in, and yeah.
So sometimes when I ask my students, and I do this every Friday, I call it Friday Flipgrids. And in the beginning, they were like, oh, again, Friday. And they weren't used to it, right? They weren't used to talking to me this much, because every Friday I was like, I need to hear you. I miss you. I want you, like I need to see you. And every Friday, it's called Friday Flipgrid, they have to send me something. Now, sometimes we talk about environmental science issues. Like I'll say, what do you think about this issue? We saw this news article. There's a news clip. So like the majestic plastic bag was an example for Friday Flipgrid. But a lot of times I'm just asking them to self-assess themselves. And while I don't use the word self-assess and I don't ask them like, how do they think they're doing in class? I give them that space. I give them that role, and then I reply to them too. So, one student was excited, one student is having a tough week. I want to know that from my students. I want to hear them. And that was the thing that I was missing a lot when I started asynchronous remote teaching, not hearing that voice. And I'm really glad that I was able to find a platform and a means to really listen to them in this way. Okay, skip that. So I want to say I do use tests and quizzes. I really do. But I want to observe my students beyond that. I want to see the understanding of concepts and the way that they're taking the information and what they're doing with it. So a lot of my assessments now in asynchronous remote learning, again, because I don't see them regularly, they're working on their own. I want them to create and synthesize. So a lot of that is coming out in the forms of presentations that are giving me. So they'll make a PowerPoint presentation and then they'll narrate it if we don't get a chance to meet. If we do have time to meet, then they'll present live to me. But the presentations sometimes are just narrated. I'm having them do posters. So there's actually a New Jersey Department of Health competition called Protect Me with 3, and it's asking for vaccinations. And so 2 students here have vaccination posters. The Soil Conservation District in New Jersey is looking for healthy forests, healthy soils, healthy communities. So those are 2 posters that I just collected this week. We started with that recycling picture on the right-hand side. So I said, hey, why is recycling important? And we started a unit that way, and it comes full circle back to the end, right? So we have videos and we have posters, and they tell me why they think recycling is essential to our community. Sometimes it does come out in essays. Sometimes I do need them to do some writing. Sometimes it's PowerPoint presentations. And then at the end, I love to do like a gallery walk. So we'll do an online digital gallery, and they'll kind of get to see their classmates' work, and then they can see where they stand, right? Where are they in the class? How are they performing? How's it going? So I'm going to skip to the end. I just had like a revisiting all the different formats and the different platforms that I use. And I wanted to make sure I left a little bit of time at the end to answer any questions or feedback that you might have. So thank you very much for being here, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Claire. That was wonderful. You're clearly very passionate, and your students are lucky to have you. So I'm going to look through the chat box here. Oh, here we have from Vera. She says, in a remote setting, how much time do students have to get through one round of the 5 E's?
That's a good question. My pacing depends really on my students, and I am actually using the same amount of time that I used to use in person with the 5E now in remote, because my students have learned that I'll give them the timeline. So I'll say that we're going to cover, unit 5, and unit 5 is going to take 3 weeks. It would have taken 3 weeks in person, but they know that I expect at the end of the 3 weeks, we need to reach the last stage of evaluation. And then they pace themselves along that pathway. So I'll say, we're going to start at the beginning, and then there's probably going to be an assessment somewhere in the middle where I'm going to be quizzing you on this date. We're also going to be getting together with our classmates to collaborate. So they kind of know, well, next Wednesday, I need to collaborate with Kelly, and we need to sit down and we need to put this PowerPoint together. So they self-pace themselves leading up to that point, and then they know that the PowerPoint is due, and then there's just different assignments. So I go more by deadlines, and then in between, I do checks with them, either through Flipgrid. I also hold Google Meets, and then I just kind of check in with them when they can, if they can.
Thank you. Kelly is asking about the competitions and contests. How do you find them? Is there some kind of clearinghouse for all these competitions, or are you just Googling them, or how are you finding all these great things?
In the beginning, I was just frantically reaching out to platforms like this. Like I would just attend professional developments where other educators were attending, and I went to virtual research teacher convention, and I'm just trying to pick up on other people and just getting it from other educators. Today, I would say more than half of my competitions are student initiated. They tell me what they want to work on. So I've got to the point this week, I think maybe Friday, a student emailed me and Molly, and she said, Miss Ung, what about this competition? Can we participate in this? So it's got to the point where they recognize the value of it. They like the assignments, and now they are student sourcing for me. So I'm really excited that I've reached that point.
That's great that it's coming from them. And Tom is asking if you have any recommendations for non-formal educators who only have about an hour with their audience.
When I'm on a time crunch, the one that really works really well for me is a Solve in Time. So the Solve in Time, I'll type it really quick in here. Solve in Time is by Dee Lanier. And his program that he has very guided but yet open-ended questions. So it almost presents itself in a way where he'll say, here's a problem. Now let's tackle it. What do you know about it? What can we solve it? And then it goes, and the time frame is about an hour or less when you're running that. And it gets them going through the 5 E's.
That's great. Thank you. I'm looking. I don't see any other questions. A lot of answers. Someone mentioned that Blackboard has voice threads, which is similar to Flipgrid. It works great. So that might be an alternative to Flipgrid. And is anybody
There are
else?
like so many platforms. So I actually have, let me see if I can pull it slide back up. There are like a lot of platforms that work better or not as great for different people, I think. And I think it's a matter of finding what works for you. I will say that I have probably tried out 4 times more platforms than what is listed here. And some things I signed up and within a week, I was like, this is not working for me. This is not something that I can move. It's not intuitive. It doesn't make sense for me. And others that I just fell in love with. So I think you also have to just experiment a little bit, like our students, right? We got to explore, we got to experiment, and some things work and some things don't. And I personally find that Flipgrid is my favorite platform. I find that I can create very authentic videos. They hear my voice, they see my face, I'm instructing them. So I'll say, all right, guys, I want you to work on this competition and here's why. And they can see me. And then I can respond to them, because I think there's something to be said that we lose when we are asynchronous and we're remote. I think students just miss our face. They miss our voice. They miss our gestures, the way that I play with my hair or, talk with my hands. Like those are things that they miss. And I miss about them. I want to see her face. I want to see that she's sad this week. I want to see that he's upset. And Flipgrid is one of my favorite platforms for that. And you can set it so that either all the students in a class see it, or it can be private just to the teacher. So you can send private videos one-on-one with students too. But there's a lot of great platforms. Like I really enjoy online teaching.
And I want to say thank you, Claire.
Yes, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation today. It was so enlightening from all of us who have spent the last year trying to start from scratch to a new method. This was really insightful, and thank you so much. We appreciate your time here today, and congratulations on the Teacher of the Year award. And yep, congrats.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate seeing all the feedback in the chat. Thank you for participating.
Of course. And to everybody who attended the presentation today, go through the calendar. There are still lots of great experiences, learning and networking over the next couple of weeks. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll see this entire presentation recorded on it, and you can see many other past presentations that you may not have been able to attend. Wednesday is the last day to register for our Saturday in-person field experiences. If you've signed up, even if you signed up for the conference already, it's not too late to go back and sign up for a field trip. And thanks again to our conference sponsors, PSE&G, New Jersey Natural Gas, and our anonymous donor. So thank you very much and have a wonderful evening, everybody. And thank you again, Claire.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night, everybody.